Dear friends, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be able to offer this presentation as part of the conference arranged by the Association for Baha'i Studies. Well, of course, I regret the circumstances that keep us apart. I would much rather have been together with you all. But nevertheless, my thanks go to all those friends who have contributed to making this virtual conference possible. My hope is that my comments will help to contribute to the deliberations and presentations that will be made in the coming days that are part of the conference. Now, of course, what I'm sharing with you are my own personal views, and so naturally you should take them for what they're worth and consider them in the light of your own thinking and studies. In 1925, a European woman was touring the Middle East when she learned about the Baha'i faith. And so she made an arrangement to learn more about it, and an appointment was made for her to meet with Shoghi Effendi. And later she wrote a book about her travels, and it included this passage about the Baha'is. It said, "They are a lovable and fascinating people, the Baha'is, idealists who have dreamed a dream of peace that passes all understanding, who seek to bring relief to restless, unhappy human hearts, who by cooperation would replace competition and blend all races, religions, nations, and classes into one harmonious whole. A beautiful dream, too, good, it is feared, to come true in our present state of imperfection and atavistic crudity, but a dream that is pleasant to come into contact with, as I did for a couple of hours on a blazing April afternoon." Now, of course, this early account is not the only account that sees the faith as essentially utopian, as Baha'is as good people, but idealists aiming towards something that really isn't quite possible for human beings to obtain. Of course, even in recent years, some people continue to see the Baha'is in this light, looking at perhaps our non-involvement in politics or their lack of familiarity with the faith, to believe that Baha'is are not really involved in the real problems facing humanity. So the question derives from this: how does such a small band of so-called idealists expect to be able to make their dream a reality? How do Baha'is see that they're going to be able to achieve these high hopes? So, of course, it's certainly not through political action. If we call the message of the House of Justice tracing the path to peace, and we see that from the time of Baha'u'lláh himself, the world was divided between contending kings and princes. Gradually, these relationships evolved, but led to the First World War. Humanity tried to then again reorganize its affairs, but again laid the seeds of another contest in the Second World War. There, humanity became very close to addressing the fundamental structural problems in society, but again set the stage for the Cold War, and then the search for a new world order. But then after that, again, things disintegrated with terrorism and other conflicts. And again, more than 100 years later, we see ourselves facing a contest between great powers. So political solutions by themselves don't seem to be able to resolve the issue. Whatever steps forward that are progressive, they're met by other steps which continue to disrupt the balance of the world. It's also not a question of mere personal behavior. If people behaved in their personal lives as good people, then all of these problems would go away. As this astute observer noted, it wasn't just the ideals of the Baha'is that weren't practical. It was because of the behavior of human beings that made the realization of these ideals impossible. So it's the very purpose of the manifestation of God to come and transform the inner and outer life of humanity. This problem is essentially one of the moral order. Since the human race began, it's always struggled with certain kinds of questions. Who am I? What am I supposed to do? What ought human beings in general do? What kinds of actions are right and what kinds of actions are wrong? What constitutes a good life and a good society? What do I owe to other people? What's the nature of the sound relationships among human beings? And what form ought they to take? Questions like these have been around since the time of hunter-gatherer groups. These questions are essential to human existence. If that group of individuals answered these questions one way, they might not survive. If they answer another way, then their clan might flourish. So the nature of religion is this business of addressing the heart of these questions, which is an insight into the nature of the moral order and of morality, how human beings ought to live their lives to find meaning and to achieve their purpose. So in a sense, this is the most pressing challenge of our current age as well. If we look at the headlines around us, we see the breakdown in the fabric of the existing order. This, of course, Shoghi Effendi defined as the disintegration of the old world order. The light of religion is extinguished. Human beings don't know where to turn, what direction to turn in. Various ideologies are substituted for what used to be the divine teachings and the moral order. As people lose their sense of identity and they begin to group themselves according to different groups, and then each group assigns itself its own moral criteria. Human beings are divided. Essentially, one thinker described it as a division into moral tribes. So people are dividing themselves in various forms of us and them. And there's a certain set of rules and behavior for us, and then another set of rules and behavior for them. And we have to treat ourselves a certain way, but we can treat them in a very different way. So if we look at the existing world, we see it's as if it's like a mosaic, a beautiful mosaic of glass that's been shattered and broken into different pieces. And humanity can't quite figure out how to put these pieces back together. So what I'm going to address is what Baha'u'lláh has said about these various questions and how it frames the approach of what Baha'is are doing in order to resolve these different issues. Now, this is a little bit of a different perspective of the way that we usually think about our work. But I think that looked at from this different perspective, particularly at this important moment where we stand between one concluding series of plans, the beginning of another, the close of the first century of the formative age, and the beginning of a new century. And what the House of Justice referred to in its message in past November, that this is a time, a year of profound reflection. Reflection on the life of Abdu'l-Bahá, on the strength of the covenant, of which he was the center, and of the challenges that we've met in the past and the challenges that we have to meet in the future. So I want to just take these brief moments with you to step back and consider the fundamental nature of the enterprise in which we're engaged. Now, human beings have looked at these questions of morality and the moral order, as I said, for as long as human beings have existed. For tens of thousands of years, they've looked to religion as a source of insight. And of course, religion has helped humanity unite itself, but then and lift itself to a higher stage in social evolution. But then after a time, of course, there's human ideas creep in, and the power of religion is displaced when people become divided over human ideas. Another source of insight over thousands of years has been the area of philosophy, where people have used the power of the mind to try to understand the nature of moral questions. And so there have been certain deep insights into aspects of the moral order, the nature of virtue ethics, or deontology, which addresses universal rules and principles of what's right and what's wrong, or areas of philosophy like consequentialism that looks at good outcomes and that lead to the well-being of the human race. But also intermixed with these positive ideas have been various problematic ideas as well, ideas that haven't contributed to this same framework, even to the point of like in the question of emotivism, where the very nature of morality is questioned, where it seems as if what we call morality and right and wrong and good and well-being is just an expression of individual human desire. Finally, in more recent years, different fields of social science, psychology, sociology, evolutionary biology, neuroscience, have tried to look at the human being in a scientific way to understand the nature of the human being and what makes the human being flourish. So again, certain very good insights have come, the appreciation of human moral development, aspects of human reasoning, things that contribute to good character, and so on, have been drawn from this. But also there have been its own limitations as well, not an inability to really fully appreciate human consciousness, and also certain conclusions that have left human beings questioning whether human beings even have a free will or consciousness at all. So each of these instruments that have contributed to thought about the moral order have had positive contributions, but also negative results as well. And so it's left human beings without any clear sense of what this reliable moral framework is, and something that could unite people around it. So what then insights can we draw from this? What is morality on the basis of these various contributions? Well, of course, there's different ideas about that. Morality is virtue, it's right and wrong, it's what's good, it's a social contract, it's what leads to human happiness, it's about good character or habit or whatever. But also, on the other side, there's a denial of these things and a belief that is reinforced that, well, there is really no reliable moral framework. Morals are what people say they are, and so human beings are essentially trapped in a struggle for existence. But perhaps the best conception of morality that we can draw from this concerns the nature of the relationships that place human beings in proper context with others and explains what is due to each. That is, what do we owe to one another, thereby bringing about the empirical results of human flourishing. What's good, what's right, what's just, resulting in peace, unity, prosperity, a meaningful life, and the common good in the form of an ever-advancing civilization. So, and I'd like to turn to what Baha'u'lláh has said about these things, to get his perspective on this question of morality and the moral order, particularly at this time of the coming of age of the human race. So Baha'u'lláh, of course, begins by describing the nature of the human being. The essential reality of the human being is the soul. Every human being is a soul, has a soul. And within that soul are certain God-given capabilities: a mind, a heart, a will, a power of agency, spiritual attributes, and a free conscience that is only responsible, only accountable to God. So with this human soul, God has given us these endowments with the expectation that we'll use them, that our purpose in being in this world is to express and cultivate these human endowments. So the fact that every human being possesses the soul establishes the essential oneness of human beings, that we all have this divine endowment. We're all one. Of course, this oneness has to express itself in unity and diversity. It's not that there will be uniformity because our essential reality is one. But what it means is there can't be any othering, that all these ways that human beings have divided themselves into us and them have to come to an end. And we have to recognize our essential oneness. Now, this essential oneness, again, is not a uniformity, but it's an equality of condition. It's a recognition that our endowments are the same. It doesn't mean that the portion that we received is identical. As Baha'u'lláh says, for some, it's that portion might lie in the palm of a hand, or perhaps a cup full, or perhaps a gallon measure. But each of us has this identical condition that's formed by this identical potential endowment latent in our soul. The honor and distinction of the human being, Abdu'l-Bahá describes it, because we all have this God-given endowment, we all have honor. But then we distinguish ourselves through what we do with this portion that we're given. So Abdu'l-Bahá says the honor and distinction of the individual consists in this, that he among the world's multitudes should become a source of culture, of social good. And this is man's uttermost wretchedness, that he should live inert, apathetic, dull, involved only with his base appetites. So this is the individual dimension of the human being. Then, of course, Baha'u'lláh also describes this collective dimension. Human beings are not designed to live in this world by themselves. They're social beings. And so society then, the collective in which human beings live, is both an environment in which then these individual souls are nurtured and developed, and also a protagonist in its own right to carry forward certain ideas in the form of a just and ever-advancing civilization. And in a certain sense, the fact that we recognize that every human being has a soul and an equal endowment, and that we are all fundamentally one, implies, implicit in that, is the idea then that the social order has to be organized in a way so that every human being can give expression to these potentialities. We can't organize the social world where some people have a chance to develop their mind, to express their agency, to live their life, while other people are exploited and denied these opportunities. Or while some are subjects, others become the objects where through oppression and other means, their potentialities are taken away or exploited for the benefit of others. So the society then, in order to have a just society, it has to be structured so that each individual within it can express these potentials. Each human soul born into this world is a trust of the society as a whole. Now, another factor is Baha'u'lláh describes the kind of historical story of which we're a part. So we know this as the concept of progressive revelation, that throughout human history, God has sent a divine educator, And the purpose, again, is to transform the individual, the inner and outer life of the human being. So both individual and the collective. And then humanity progresses through a series of stages then in order to be able to bring to full expression these potential that God has placed within us. Abdu'l-Bahá explains that the nature of what the manifestation brings is not just the arbitrary teachings, like the arbitrary opinion of God or the arbitrary opinion of the manifestation. He says the laws of God are not imposition of will or of power or pleasure, but the resolutions of truth, of reason, and justice. So he describes the teachings as the standard of true morality, because the manifestation of God can see the reality of human nature and can read the reality of the social world, and can see then what the potentialities of the human being are at the beginning of the dispensation, and provides then the healing remedy, the divine prescription of the teachings to take humanity to the next stage of its development. And because this is grounded in the reality of human nature and in the reality of the material and social world, then the implications of these teachings are the same for the entire human race. They're not just intended for Baha'is themselves. So just as the manifestation of God then has this twofold purpose of transforming the inner and outer life of humanity, then every human being has also a twofold moral purpose to develop and cultivate their own inner life, but then also to contribute to the shaping of the social order. So it's as if with this divine endowment, our life is about the cultivation of the expression of these potentialities. And so we live out the story of our life in a coherent way, as if we were kind of like a moral artist weaving the tapestry of our own moral life. And then at the same time, we're an active social agent who's contributing to the advancement of society as a whole. Now, all of these laws, exhortations, principles, and methods that are bound up in Baha'u'llah's teachings, this standard of true morality, are an effort by Baha'u'llah to try to redefine the nature of these relationships among all of these component parts. So describing what we owe to one another and how we should organize ourselves so justice is expressed. So you think about the range of relationships that Baha'u'llah describes, the relationship between God and the human being, the relationship of ourselves with Baha'u'llah and his covenant, our relationship with our own selves, our relationship with other human beings, the relationship among human beings and among individuals and groups of human beings, or various groups or as society is organized, the individual's relationship to the institutions of society and so on, and even the relationship of humanity to the material world. The teachings govern all of these things, and we have to figure out how to bring all of these elements into their proper relationship. It's like the idea of an electromagnet. You have a power source, you have a wire, you have a piece of metal, and when all of these relationships are properly organized, then you have an electromagnet that exerts a certain power. And that power has an influence, an electromagnetic field is created, and it has an influence on the reality around it. So if our relationships are in their proper order, then this power flows through us as well, and we could begin to have effect not only in our own lives, but also in the lives of others and in the relationship of the wider society. Now, Baha'u'llah's conception transcends all these other ways of thinking about the reality. It draws certain, well, it doesn't draw from them, but it contains within them some of those insights, the highest insights that have come from these various forms, but obviously he puts it in a different way. And so his standard opposes then this idea of the struggle for existence and other philosophies and ideologies that put certain things above the idea of human flourishing itself. Finally, Baha'u'llah's teachings present a fundamental moral challenge. That is the end of evil in the world. In this world, it's inherent that there be suffering, because that's the nature of the material world. The purpose of that suffering is to awaken us to other qualities, to joy, to being able to work together to overcome suffering. But evil exists in the world as a result of human action. Baha'u'llah said, every good thing is of God, and every evil thing is from yourselves. And he also writes, for were men to abide by and observe the divine teachings, every trace of evil would be banished from the face of the earth. If we reconfigure these relationships, then the human world would be a different world. Now, up to this point, I've been talking about morality and the moral order. But of course, it shouldn't be mistaken that what I'm doing here is reducing Baha'u'llah's teachings to, in some way, to just mere moral aspects of human life. In fact, Baha'u'llah himself addresses this question. He said, think not that we have revealed unto you a mere code of laws. Nay, rather, we have unsealed the choice wine with the fingers of might and power. This choice wine, of course, is his revelation, which gives us insights into reality that is not immediately apparent to us. But morality, changing the moral order and affecting these relationships is the essence of religion. But morality cannot be separated from spirituality and spiritual forces. So in a Pilgrim's Note, Abdu'l-Bahá draws a distinction between the moral life and the spiritual life. He was reported to have said, moral life consists in the government of oneself. Immortality is government of a human soul by the divine will. So the best human beings can do for themselves is to create some kind of framework of moral framework that contributes to human well-being and a good life and a good society. But in a certain sense, then, that's human beings through their own powers, their own limited powers, trying to decide what the best order is. Whereas this divine standard of morality is governance by the divine will. So there's an intimate connection then with our spiritual reality, these twin duties that Baha'u'llah describes. So out of our recognition of the manifestation of God, we become a new creation. We're spiritually quickened, and we move from a rational soul to a soul born of the spirit of faith. We have a conviction in a spiritual reality that we didn't have before. And this conviction then drives our action. It drives then our behavior, where we obey every one of his ordinances for love of his beauty. So the danger with one framework is that human beings begin to bend morality to their own desires, whereas what should be happening is human beings bend themselves to the moral order, and this spirituality gives us not only the driving force for wanting to do that, but then clarifies the proper framework that guides us. So this, in the faith, the idea of faith and belief cannot be separated from deeds. the association with this deep spiritual conviction then drives the beginning of new relationships with God and with ourselves and with others and with the world and with the institutions of society and so on. For Baha'is, spirituality and faith is a conscious conviction and action of responsible moral agents toward these right relationships. It's not confined just to correct private thoughts or correct knowledge or virtue and so on. So when we see that what Baha'u'lláh has come to do, he's changing the nature of relationships between and the identity, in a certain sense, of individuals, communities, and institutions. So the institutions of society move from where they are to become a framework of a new world order. And society moves from a material-driven society to one that becomes an ever-advancing spiritual civilization. And human beings are recreated to become a new human race. Baha'u'lláh said, "A race of men incomparable in character shall be raised up, which will cast the sleeve of holiness over all that hath been created from water and clay." So this idea of holiness is spiritual and moral excellence. And so when we become this new creation, we're able to cast this sleeve of holiness, of spiritual and moral excellence over the created world. So that becomes then our purpose. Baha'u'lláh didn't come just to make us mystic knowers. He came that we should become transformed, but then through that spiritual conviction, we should transform the world around us. So then social action, involvement in the discourses of society, these are not mere good deeds, not some secondary activities in which we engage in because maybe they might be some aspect of the plan and so on, but they're intimately related to Baha'u'llah's plan for humanity. Our conviction has to be expressed in action in the world to change our lives and to change the world around us. Now, Baha'u'lláh has given us a number of different instruments to help us, a number of gifts that help us along our path. The first, of course, is his revelation. And in it are the various insights, the various concepts, the various practices we need in order to begin the process of changing these relationships, of establishing justice in the world. Of course, unfortunately, we have limited time, but I'll just mention a few of these, which hopefully will stimulate your own investigation into it. One, of course, is Baha'u'llah's statements about the importance of truth and the nature of the independent investigation of reality. We don't just take what others say. We don't just reflect the ideas of others, but we have to investigate reality and understand it. And this independent investigation, seeking out the truth, one thing is to recognize that truth exists, and then we have to find it. But then that immediately pushes aside the idea of ideology, where there's certain beliefs in certain ideas, and then these ideas are packaged in a certain way in society, so they become more important than human flourishing itself. So if human beings have to be sacrificed for these ideas, then what does it matter? Or people feel like these truth doesn't exist at all, and that all that exists is a contest for power. And whoever has that power, then they decide how things ought to be, and so on. Another aspect of Baha'u'llah's teachings is this concept of love, this divine love, which he says conquers the citadels of human hearts and binds together people in these proper relationships. Baha'u'lláh said, the beginning of religion is love for God and for his chosen ones. And its end is to manifest that love to his servants. Part of this division into us and them means that people won't listen to them. No matter what ideas come from somebody who's considered in the other camp, well, people won't listen to them because they're the other. They're not to be respected. But they will listen to somebody from within the us camp for advice and for guidance and so on. So this power of love has to be used to bind people together, to transcend these barriers in us and them. And then as human beings come together, they could begin to be drawn together in the search for solutions. Another aspect of what Baha'u'lláh said is the idea of justice. He said justice is giving what is due. And this idea of justice as expressed in Baha'u'llah's teachings takes various forms. Justice is a virtue that has to be cultivated among the other virtues. Justice has to do with certain principles and rules and laws that guide, that provide a universal standard for human behavior. But justice is also associated with understanding the common good and what makes for a meaningful life and how human affairs should be organized to bring about human happiness, and so that divine justice is established on the face of the earth. Baha'u'lláh also talks about the importance of speech, that speech seeks to have an influence, but that through one form of speech, you end up dividing people. Another form of speech can bring people together and unite them. And so he also gives consultation as a method for how humanity can exchange different views. But unlike the past, where argumentation descends into various forms of contest to try to win and insist upon the correctness of your own idea, consultation detaches us from our own ideas and enables us to listen to one another and hear one another and find a way to harmonize our thinking in a unified effort to search for truth. There are many, many other of these teachings. One important one, he talks about the idea of tolerance and righteousness for governing the affairs of human beings. And we tend to think of that in terms of tolerance for ourselves and righteousness toward others, when in fact, it has to be the reverse. We need to do what's right, even as we're forbearing with others in their efforts to develop and grow. And finally, another important one is the idea of that these moral teachings are something that's real, something that's empirical. As Jesus said, religion is tested by whether or not it brings forth good fruits. A good tree brings forth good fruits, and a bad tree cannot bring forth good fruits. And so it's not just a bunch of ideas, religious teachings that become beliefs, that become an ideology, but it's whether you put these teachings into practice, then you can see in reality the change and positive effect on people's lives and on society as a whole. Another tool, gift Baha'u'lláh has given us is the idea of his covenant and the administrative order that's the child of that covenant. Abdu'l-Bahá explains that it's evident that the axis of the oneness of the world of humanity is the power of the covenant and nothing else. He says, today, the dynamic power of the world of existence is the power of the covenant, which like unto an artery pulsateth in the body of the contingent world. So Abdu'l-Bahá is not describing what the covenant means to the Baha'is only, but the covenant has implications for the uniting of the entire world. As I mentioned, one of the pitfalls of religion is when people lose touch with the divine teachings and begin to insert their own ideas. And all through human history, religion has fallen prey to this imposition of ideas from people who thought they knew better than everybody else. But Baha'u'lláh established his covenant in order to give Baha'is a point to which they could turn. And because Baha'is could maintain their unity, then they could play the essential role that they have to play in helping to extend the influence of Baha'u'llah's teachings to the wider society, thus being a framework for the unity of the entire human race. So Baha'u'llah has given us a very revolutionary system that harmonizes the relationships among individuals, communities, and institutions, that makes humanity one group, that puts an end for the first time in history to the concept of us and them. So it does this, first of all, by creating this center to whom we should all turn. First Abdu'l-Bahá, then after Abdu'l-Bahā's passing, he perpetuated the covenant in the form of the administrative order with the guardianship and the universal house of justice. So this gives the Baha'i world two authoritative centers to which it can turn: the book and with its interpreters, and the guidance of the universal house of justice. And Abdu'l-Bahá captures this in his will and testament. He said, "Unto the most holy book everyone must turn, and all that is not expressly recorded therein must be referred to the universal house of justice. That which this body, whether unanimously or by a majority doth carry, that is verily the truth and purpose of God himself." So Baha'is know where to turn. It's like having a compass that keeps you pointed in the right direction, no matter where you are, no matter what stage of the development of the faith, no matter what challenges. We have this reliable compass that can help keep us pointed in the right direction. So the function of the House of Justice is to legislate, to administer the affairs of the cause, to coordinate the faith's activities, to promote its interests, to execute its laws, and to defend its institutions. It also carries forward certain responsibilities that it shared with the guardian: the continuity of divine authority, the responsibility to safeguard the unity of the followers, to maintain the integrity of the teachings, and also to maintain their flexibility. So we all turn to the book, and if we all understand the book, well, we're all united by its clear and evident guidance. But if at a certain point, we're not sure what the book means, maybe a point is obscure, or a problem arises that causes conflict between the Baha'is, or the book doesn't cover certain things, that's when we turn to the House of Justice. Again, as Abdu'l-Bahá said, it is incumbent upon these members to gather in a certain place and deliberate upon all problems which have caused difference, questions that are obscure, and matters that are not expressly recorded in the book. Now, beyond then the House of Justice and the guardianship, the administrative order consists of the institutional arrangements among the Baha'is themselves. So we have a system of electing our institutions. Every Baha'i participates in this process. The individual and the community and the institutions, rather than competing with one another to exert their own rights and prerogatives, they're organized in such a way as to harmonize with one another, and the responsibility of each is essentially to look out for the other one. So when somebody's elected to serve on a local spiritual assembly, the first thing they're told is to forget their own likes and dislikes. It's not like a mandate where now you have these certain interests and projects. Now that you're elected to the assembly, that gives you a platform for propagating these ideas. No, you have to forget those likes and dislikes and see what the needs of the community are and think about the empowerment of all the individuals and the well-being and flourishing of the community as a whole. These become your primary responsibility rather than these other pursuits that you were interested before. The individual has the responsibility to prepare themselves to be a good elector, but then also to support the local spiritual assembly. Even in cases we know in consultation, even if they feel that a mistake has been made, then still the individual supports the institution. It can share whatever concerns it might have directly to the institution, not fomenting that discord among other believers. But then it supports the institution. The entire community moves forward together to test its ideas in action. And then, if necessary, these steps can be revised. So the community is responsible for the individual and the institution. And the institution is concerned about the individual and the community's well-being. And the individual is responsible to ensure that there's a thriving community and a strongly supported institution. So unlike the relationships in society where there's a constant competition, a suspicion of authority, contest for power, Baha'u'lláh has rearranged this in a system of support and mutual cultivation and strengthening. Now, what happens is then all of these components then are empowered in order to fulfill their responsibility rather than control. The covenant does not create a framework of restriction. It creates a framework of freedom. The decisions of the House of Justice are not intended to compel people into particular forms of action. Baha'u'lláh doesn't want us to follow him blindly. What happens is when the House of Justice makes certain decisions to guide the community, it selects the next plans, for example, based on the current stage of the development of the organic development of the faith, the current needs of society. It frames in a particular plan what needs to be done at this time to help develop the faith to move to its next stage. Individuals then have to make a choice that as they think about these various coherent aspects of their life, what part will they play in contributing to the needs of the community at this particular stage of its development? So it's like the idea of air traffic control system. I mean, what we can do now, we have the freedom to fly any place in the world. And almost by magic, in a few hours, you can be on the other side of the world. But this freedom is not purchased through license. It doesn't mean everybody can do what they ought to do, what they want to do. It means that because there's a certain framework, because there's certain rules that administer the safety of airlines, because there's certain structures for how airlines can fly and where they can go, it means that then people are empowered to move seamlessly in every direction. So the human being is empowered through adherence to a proper framework. And the covenant is the axis of the oneness of humanity because it preserves the unity and the integrity of the faith and ensures that it can do the job that Baha'u'lláh designed it to do. And it prevents it from being disrupted by individuals who are convinced that only their understanding of the faith is correct, or the belief in any aspect of the work of the community is correct. And they try then to impose their ideas on others. The faith is protected from that. Finally, friends, there's this precious gift that Baha'u'lláh gave us, which is his son, Abdu'l-Bahá. And not only Abdu'l-Bahá is the center of the covenant, but also the example of Abdu'l-Bahá as the way that we have to strive to translate Baha'u'llah's teachings into reality. So Abdu'l-Bahá is this embodiment of every Bahá'í ideal. He's the perfect exemplar that we have to follow. And, often we think in terms of Abdu'l-Bahā's example, in certain cases, some vignettes, and how that translates then for how we think, how we ought to behave. And of course, that's a powerful idea in its own right. But I like to think just a little bit differently then about Abdu'l-Bahā's example. And of course, I'm completely inadequate to be able to do it. But I just offer some of my own thoughts for your consideration. If we think about the example of Abdu'l-Bahá in relation to this concept of morality and the moral order, of Abdu'l-Bahá as a moral agent, of how he acts in the world to be able to transform it in all of its dimensions to bring it into alignment with Baha'u'llah's expectations for humanity. So, for example, one aspect of this is we can look at Abdu'l-Bahā's contribution to the intellectual challenges facing humanity. In one tablet, Baha'u'lláh, in thinking about Abdu'l-Bahá, wrote, "We pray to God to illumine the world through thy knowledge and wisdom." And then we see these great contributions that Abdu'l-Bahá made. His will and testament, which is the charter document of a new world order, his tablets of the divine plan, which is the charter document of the organic growth and development of the faith during this formative period. Other profound documents that he wrote, The Secret of Divine Civilization, which gives us insights into the spiritual and economic development of nations, and also his other addresses, his tablet to The Hague, and the various presentations he made in the West that help us understand peace as something more than an end to war, but peace as the configuration of all these elements and relationships that Baha'u'llah talked about, the advancement of women, the elimination of poverty, education of people, and so on. So these profound insights now are guiding the Baha'i world as we learn how to understand these insights Abdu'l-Bahá provided, and then how we try to translate them into action in our own efforts to begin to help mold these relationships of society. Another aspect is the self-identity of Abdu'l-Bahá as an example to ourselves. Abdu'l-Bahá considered himself the servant of Baha'u'llah, and he wouldn't accept any praise. He was impervious to any kind of blame because he knew who he was and he knew what his mission was, and nothing could sway him from performing the function that he knew he needed to perform. He also called upon the Baha'is to follow him. He said, "Look at me, follow me, be as I am. Take no thought for yourselves or your lives, whether ye eat or whether ye sleep, whether ye are comfortable, whether ye are well or ill, whether ye are with friends or foes, whether you receive praise or blame. For all of these things, ye must not care at all." So then what about our identity? Is it as firmly rooted, or are we a little more susceptible to some of these forces blowing us in one direction, how others think about us, how others judge our actions, and so on? Or are we able to see ourselves also as servants of Baha'u'llah, citizens of the world order of Baha'u'llah, who have certain responsibilities, and then we walk in those footsteps of the Master, even if people don't understand why we're doing what we're doing. Another aspect, I think, powerful moral example that Abdu'l-Bahá is given us is how he has used the power of speech. I mentioned before that this speech is important for unraveling this framework of moral tribes, that people are bound and they're divided and they can't talk and they can't listen. And they escalate a contest for power until they can impose their ideas on this other group. And so there's one group gets the upper hand, imposes its ideas, the other group has to retreat, but then it coalesces and it comes back. So even if that previous group did something good that contributed to moral well-being, this other group gets into power, it changes what it thinks is bad, it brings in what it thinks is good, and so humanity continues to go around in these circles and not be able to resolve its problem. So Abdu'l-Bahá used his speech to transcend these divisions of us and them, to call people to a higher way of thinking, to help the person feel that they're one with Abdu'l-Bahá, And then he begins to gradually share with them insights based on their capacity to lift them up to a higher level. In one talk, Baha'u'lláh was talking about this idea of the power of speech and the example of Abdu'l-Bahá. And he said, these again are reported words, "Whatever a person say, hollow and product of vain imaginings and parrot-like repetition of somebody else's views, though it be, one ought to let it pass. One should not engage in disputation leading to and ending with obstinate refusal and hostility, because the other person would consider himself worsted and defeated. One ought to say, right, admitted, but look at the matter in this way, and judge for yourself whether it is true or false. Of course, it should be said with courtesy, with kindness, with consideration. He will agree, because he comes to realize that the purpose has not been to engage in verbal battle and to gain mastery over him. He comes to realize that the purpose has been to impart the word of truth. His eyes and ears are opened. His heart responds. His true nature unfolds. So throughout Baha'u'llah's writings, he talks about the nature of speech. One form of speech is a deadly poison, another a healing remedy. Sometimes it's meat, sometimes it's as mild as milk. And so wisdom has to be used to engage others. Baha'is have to develop a capacity for moral persuasion. This changing of the relationships of the world is not going to be done by the Baha'is alone. Every nation and every people will have to participate, but only if they can be empowered to see their part in it, and only if they can leave behind these habits of division and prejudice and contention that divides the human race. For example, you see with this use of language in relationship to issues of race now in North America, and people have divided themselves. And they use language in such a way as to contend with one another and exert power over one another. With race itself, there's a kind of an enervating paradox at the heart of it. On the one hand, if you say science says that there are no races, there's just the human race, therefore I'm colorblind, I don't see color. On the one hand, it's true that there is no spiritual or biological foundation to race, but the reality is that there is a social reality to race that human beings have constructed. And to say that you're colorblind means that you can't see the injustices that exist because of prejudice, and because you can't see them, there's nothing that you can do about it. On the opposite extreme, to say that there are different races, all humanity is divided into these different categories. If you're in this category, the way to think and the way to behave is thus and so, then you're actually inadvertently buying into the framework, the unjust framework that has divided humanity. And then you perpetuate that scheme and force others into the same boxes generation after generation. Of course, the solution to it is the insight from the Baha'i teachings that talk first about our oneness, that we're all one, but then about the expression of that oneness in a unity in diversity that sees the value of different peoples, different cultures, and the unique contribution that each has to play in the part of coming together and building an ever-advancing civilization. So the House of Justice, when it wrote last year to the Baha'is in the United States, warned them that they can't merely draw from this language in the wider society, because they end up perpetuating the same divisions that are happening in the wider society. If you go, oftentimes you look at the internet, you see a story, you see an article, then you start reading the comments under that article. What you see are people essentially parroting ideas that have already been developed by these different moral tribes. So it's just a kind of almost a blind repetition of the same talking points over and over and over again, even to the point of some ideas that are not even true. So humanity becomes trapped. I'm on this team. I'm in this moral tribe. Therefore, I think like this. Therefore, I act like that. And therefore, my action toward that other tribe is justified. I'm doing it for the good of humanity and so on. So Baha'is, if we just get caught up in that same thing, if we're parroting those same ideas, if we're not able to take the conversation as it is, analyze it in light of Baha'u'llah's teachings, and elevate it, then our speech won't be effective. We'll just be perpetuating the same divisions that already exist in society, rather than, like Abdu'l-Bahá, transcending them and resolving these differences. I want to give one more example of this Abdu'l-Bahā's power of thought that helps us transcend the existing framework in the world, the moral framework in the world. So one thing that plagues humanity today is the extremes of wealth and poverty. And this is one of the principles of Baha'u'llah. Baha'is of an earlier age used to call this the spiritual solution to the economic problem. Because Baha'u'llah didn't come with an economic system. What he came with was a different way of thinking, that once human beings thought about these things differently, then they could find a way to arrange their affairs in a more just way. Today, we have a profoundly unjust economic system. There's all kinds of measures of this. I was just reading something that pointed out that the 1% of the planet, which is approximately 76 million people or so on, to 8 million, somewhere around there, have twice the wealth of 6.9 billion people, which is 90% of the planet. 1% has twice as much as 90%. Another measure of that is the billionaires on the planet, which is about 2,800 people or so. The billionaires of the planet have as much wealth as 4.6 billion people, which is roughly 60% of the people on the planet. So how did this happen? It's not because, well, there's a free market system, and if you just put it into place, this is how it comes out. No, we actually created this system. Because of what we believe, because of what we value, we created a system like this, and now the results, the fruits of this system is this, a profoundly unjust order. What happens on the level of individuals also happens on the level of nations. Some are profoundly wealthy, others are stuck in dire hardship, and so on. So the question becomes, how does this change? It changes by looking at things from a different way. If we look at every human soul, if we see every soul has to develop these potentialities, then what it means is that the minimum our economic system has to provide, it has to meet the minimum needs of every human being. And then, of course, it has to do that within the capacity of the Earth's resources. So these are like a lower boundary, the minimum needs of every people, and an upper boundary, what the Earth can provide. And our economic system should be somewhere in that range that provides those needs without damaging the planet. Now, Abdu'l-Bahá framed issues in this way. Let me just say that Baha'u'llah is not against the idea of wealth. I'm not speaking against the idea of wealth. Baha'u'llah said wealth is needed once spiritual maturity is achieved, because then the person who has the wealth will make the just decisions about what ought to be done with it. What's the proper way? Spiritual progress, Baha'u'llah said, is conditioned on material means. So wealth must be earned in a just way, and it must be distributed in a just way. So Abdu'l-Bahá speaks to this. He talks about the idea that the economic order has to provide for the health of everyone, has to provide everyone a home, has to take care of them in their retirement, has to take care of them in their ill health. Now, he doesn't promote a particular economic system. He talks about various approaches. So, for example, if you had a capitalist system, then fine. The idea is, well, you have to pay your workers what they need to eat and live and take care of their health expenses and take care of their retirement. Maybe through profit sharing, maybe through the salaries you pay them. You pay them what they need in order to survive and to express this moral artistry so that they can live a full and flourishing and meaningful life. Or on the other hand, you could have a form of a socialist system where the government taxes the wealthy and then structures certain programs for health or for retirement or whatever. So again, that these human needs can be met. It's left to the individuals to decide how this structuring will take place. But it has to be spiritually, morally illumined individuals who then make just choices. This leads to making sure that, okay, it doesn't mean that the world will all be equal, that there will be equal outcomes. But on the other extreme, it doesn't mean that there will be this kind of pseudo-meritocracy where anybody who accumulates anything, it's done because of their superiority, their hard work, or whatever. A few thousand people are not working harder than 90% of the people of the planet, and so on. So what we need is to create a system that eliminates these extremes and brings justice to our economic order. The result is a respect for this equality of condition, not one extreme or the other. And it allows everyone then to be able to fulfill their twofold moral purpose. So with this framework then Baha'u'lláh gives, and with these instruments, Abdu'l-Bahá's example, the covenant and administration and so on, we can then look quickly at the nature of our own efforts that are in the world right now. The current social order is a reflection of the world's moral choices. And the society that Baha'is are trying to create at Baha'u'llah's command and in light of his teachings is going to be a moral achievement. It's going to be created by our thoughts, our discourse, our actions, and the sum of our relationships. By moral, again, I mean this kind of action that's grounded in spiritual conviction, this government of a human soul by the divine will. So the effort of every individual then is to live a coherent life, to cultivate and give expression to all these gifts that are inherent in our soul, to live a life of moral artistry, to create a life that's good, that's purposeful, that's meaningful, that's just in our relationship to others. So Baha'i life is about this spiritual conviction that drives this. So we wake up, imagine, we wake up in the morning and we then go say our prayers. We're cultivating that proper relationship with God. We're cultivating that proper relationship with Baha'u'lláh and our covenant. We're praying, we're reading the writings. We're taking ourselves into account. We're exercising that proper relationship over ourselves to make sure that we're in line with the divine will, and that little by little, day by day, we improve that behavior. Then we step out from that chamber and we go out in the world to cast the sleeve of holiness over all that is created with water and clay. So our relationship with other believers, the members of our family, the members of our community, in our neighborhood, on our assembly, in our workplace, in all these spaces we inhabit, we're building these sound relationships, even the proper use of our material things so that we have a proper relationship with the material reality. Collectively, we're meeting the challenges of the faith at this stage of its organic development, and that have to be met in order to fulfill Baha'u'llah's moral intent. So it's like the idea in ecology of a succession of communities. If you burn down a forest and you want to regrow that forest, it doesn't come in one stage. What happens is it begins very simply with some microbes and so on, and fungus or whatever, and then that sets the stage so slightly bigger plants and insects could come that create the stage then for maybe small plants and animals to come and so on. So stage by stage, the mature forest is eventually reestablished. So the Baha'i community is developing in the same way, organically. What happened 100 years ago in 1921 and the efforts that Baha'is put into place then set the stage for the developments that were to come 60 years ago, and then set the stage for the developments that came 25 years ago, and then set the stage for where we stand now and the developments that now need to come after us. In this collective process, we can understand through this moral lens what Baha'u'lláh meant by the idea of teaching. As he explains it, if you possess a gift, well then you have an obligation to share that gift with your brother and your sister. So what you do is you're obliged to share it. How can you keep it for yourself? But then you share that gift with your brother or sister, then they have a free conscience. You have to accept whatever response they give. So if they accept it, wonderful. If they don't, they're still your brother or sister. So we still work together. We still harmonize our thoughts in terms of working together for the betterment of the world. So this is the expression of our teaching work now. We're reaching out, but whether somebody accepts or doesn't accept, we're trying to create this space where we can understand what Baha'u'lláh said and translate it into action. So one by one, we're expanding the scope of these spaces. In the past, 25 years ago, rarely did we have a community of 100 or more believers. Most were very small. The nature of our reach was very small. Now we see through the recent Rizvan message what we've been able to do by arranging our affairs on a line of clusters. We can establish many, many parts of the world where the efforts of the Baha'i community reach out to 1,000 or more people, or in some cases, even tens of thousands and so on. So we're learning, whether it's in our community building process, in our work of social and economic development, in our involvement in the discourses of society at different levels, whether they're personal involvement or the collective involvement of Baha'i institutions, we're learning how to create spaces, expand those spaces, and then within those spaces, try to understand what Baha'u'lláh said and translate it into action to reframe the relationships among individuals, communities, and institutions, to put them on a new basis, to create justice, to create understanding, to eliminate prejudice, and so on. And as our power and capacity grows, then in the future, we'll be able to even expand those spaces further. And as they multiply, as they become more powerful, as our insights into human problems grow, then we'll start to see this transformation that Baha'u'lláh has in mind. We'll begin to resolve human problems. Human beings will become a new creation. Institutions will become a new world order. Society will become a spiritual, ever-advancing civilization. So the plans in which we are engaged are not a narrow thing of core activities and institute courses. They're a broad process where we're learning to master a God-guided transformative learning process that changes relationships by spiritual and moral truth and power. The world is broken into these moral tribes, and we have to learn how to enter into all those spaces, become one with people, and begin to help to transcend the various divisions of identity and group and moral belief that are dividing the human race. This is not only a process of the fulfillment of all these different areas, it's also an aspect of the intellectual challenge we face as a community. If you think about the challenges of the next 25 years and the instruments like the Association of Baha'i Studies, the Baha'i Journal, the Institute for Studies in Global Prosperity, and so on, where we're trying to cultivate these powers of the individuals to be able to look at and analyze and tackle these human problems at an ever greater level. As we look in the future, we'll have to develop many, many more Baha'i-inspired agencies. We'll have whole villages where we need to look at the spiritual and material advancement of the people of an entire village and then an entire area. And this becomes an intellectual challenge for every Baha'i to find a piece of it that they can identify, where they can read the reality and translate it into effective action. Now, friends, I want to just briefly conclude my remarks here. The nature of the process we're engaged in is not about formulas and sets of rules. It's about learning what Baha'u'lláh said, and then striving to translate it, to put it into reality and action. We're but a small part of the world. The Guardian said we're 11. 11 is a pervading influence. We have to do what's right, and as we do that and gain that power of an electromagnet, we can begin to affect the alignment of others around us. There's no shortcut in trying to get where we're trying to go. We can't force others into proper alignment. They have freedom of conscience. There's no magic formula for dealing with it. It's about learning little by little, day by day, to translate what Baha'u'lláh said into reality and action. So we have to strive to become protagonists of a change in the relationship of human beings toward one another and become co-creators of a new spiritual and moral order in the world of humanity. I want to leave you with these words of Abdu'l-Bahá. You belong to the world of purity and are not content to live the life of the animal, spending your days eating, drinking, and sleeping. Your thoughts and ambitions are set to acquire human perfection. You live to do good and to bring happiness to others. The Heavenly Father gave the priceless gift of intelligence to man so that he might become a spiritual light, piercing the darkness of materiality and bringing goodness and truth into the world. If ye will follow earnestly the teachings of Baha'u'lláh, ye shall indeed become the light of the world, the soul for the body of the world, the comfort and help for humanity, and the source of salvation for the whole universe.